Hello, I'm Deborah Vogel, and I'd like to discuss a topic that is on many dancers and dance teachers' minds, and that is how to maximize your stretching efforts. After all, incredible flexibility is almost a trademark of a professional dancer. In this special report, I'm going to talk about 5 common stretching mistakes and how to fix them. You see, there really is a science to stretching, and it's always been my motto that if you educate a dancer, you empower them to train smart and dance smart. I'm convinced you won't find a more passionate group of people on the planet than aspiring dancers and dance teachers. Let's start by defining what good muscle tone is. After all, the best dancers are flexible and strong. Let's say that you are really strong, a great jumper with powerful legs, but don't have much flexibility. Or perhaps you have that loosey-goosey body, really flexible. You have all your splits, but you don't have much endurance or strength. Well, either one of those scenarios will leave you more vulnerable to injury. It makes a lot more sense to put your efforts towards balancing your muscle tone and preventing injuries than rehabbing from an injury that could have been prevented. Good muscle tone means that when you need a muscle to contract to create movement, it can do that easily and successfully. And when the muscle is no longer needed, it must turn off its contraction. Now, I don't want to turn this into an anatomy lesson, but I do want you to understand that it takes energy to contract a muscle. And if you're constantly contracting them, for example, I find dancers who constantly pull their kneecaps up. They keep the quadricep muscle turned on and contracted. No wonder we have an epidemic of dancers who hip flexors, especially the deeper ones, are tight and weak. Just try flexing your elbow like you were doing a bicep curl and keep it flexed for the next, 15 minutes. Do you think your bicep muscle is going to get tired? Of course. Constant contraction creates muscle bulk and makes it challenging for you to increase your flexibility. So, soft strength, good muscle tone, effective stretching and strengthening techniques will give you fast results. We need to dance smart in order to maximize our efforts. So let's jump in. Mistake number 1 is doing the majority of your passive stretching before dance class. It's common knowledge that a cold muscle does not release and stretch well, and yet I still see so many dancers come into the studio and the first thing they do is plop down on the floor in second position and stretch out. No jumping jacks, no little jog around the studio, no dynamic stretching by doing a leg swing into a lunge or traveling across the floor. Their warm-up is doing static or passive stretching at their problem areas. The goal of your warm-up should be slowly to increase your heart rate, which will raise your body temperature and increase the blood flow to your muscles. Increasing the blood flow to your muscles will help to oxygenate and prepare them for the increased demands of the dance class. A warmer muscle improves its elasticity without even stretching, which will reduce the risk of strain and tears. A warmed up muscle will contract more easily and relax more quickly, so your speed and strength will be improved. When I remember back to my dancing days in New York, some of my best classes were when I had to jog from the subway in order to get to class on time and arrived at the studio already slightly sweaty and out of breath. Now, I have a thing about time. I hate being late, so that wasn't so good for my mental health, but I was always pleased that somehow I managed to still have a good class, even though I hadn't done my normal stretching routine. Now I understand why, and if I could go back in time, I would commit to doing a much more active warming up process. First, raising my body temperature and increasing muscle warmth, and doing some pinky ball work to help release excessive tension in key areas. After class is when you should focus your stretching efforts. The body is warm, and as you're cooling down, you're asking the muscles to maintain that flexibility that you gained during the class. I tell my students to focus on one muscle group at a time and commit to stretching it daily after class and on their non-class days after being active in some other form. For many, simply doing 30 seconds to a minute of jumping jacks will swiftly increase our heart rate and body temperature. Stretching a warm muscle will produce better results, period. Stretching mistake number 2, only doing static or passive stretching. The latest research is showing that static stretching actually weakens the muscle. It has less power and strength after holding a passive stretch for 30 seconds. That fact alone is a good reason why not to do only static or passive stretching before class. This is where dynamic stretching comes in. The definition of dynamic stretching is having the muscles stretched while moving. An example of this would be kicking your leg forward into a battement, which is stretching the back of the leg and hip, and then dropping into a lunge, which stretches the front of the hip and thigh. This type of dynamic warming up turns on and wakes up your nervous system. In dynamic stretching, you're controlling your movement. You're not bouncing. Bouncing forces a body part beyond its normal range. Dynamic stretching encourages length, strength, and control. In my effective stretching DVD, I go through many types of different dynamic stretches you can do sitting in a chair in the comfort of your own home or office. Dancers understand that the goal of stretching is to lengthen the muscle. What a lot of people don't know, though, is how the fascia, which is a form of dense connective tissue, can influence your stretching efforts. Fascia is like a cobweb that runs throughout your body. It surrounds each muscle and connects with other fascia connecting to other muscles, which creates continuous lines of pull through the body. Here is a demonstration of a fascial pattern. I'd like you to cross your arms across your chest. Look and see which arm is under and which arm is on top. Now try crossing them with the other arm on top. Notice how weird that is, or maybe you even had trouble figuring out how to do that. That's because the thousands of times you've crossed your arms in the same way have molded the fascia, which is connective tissue, in a specific pattern based on that habit. What's so important about fascia and stretching is understanding that there may be tightness in a different area of the body that is influencing your intended stretching area. Working with a pinky ball before class is a good way to reduce muscular tension, which may then increase the functional flexibility somewhere else along the fascial line of the body. The way I have dancers experience this is rolling over and checking out how tight their hamstrings feel. Then take a pinky ball or a tennis ball and place it under one foot and roll and massage the bottom of the foot where the plantar fascia is. After doing that for about 30 seconds, stand back up, roll back over to notice the tightness of the hamstrings. Typically, 90% of participants will feel as if the hamstring on the same side that they just used the pinky ball has improved its flexibility. Isn't that cool? Stretching mistake number 3. Inconsistencies in your stretching efforts. When you first start stretching a new area of the body, the muscles respond as if they're a yo-yo. You stretch, the muscle lengthens, and then over a short period of time, it shortens back to its original length. To more permanently change the length of that muscle, that will take repetition and consistency in your stretching efforts. For example, if you have tight calf muscles and do lots of lunge stretching before and after class, but then wear shoes with a 2-inch heel every day, your calf muscles aren't going to respond as quickly to your stretching efforts. An even more common example is finding dancers who have a tight iliopsoas muscle, which is the deep hip flexor, and they stretch that muscle whenever they're in the studio, but then sit at a desk or a computer for 8 hours plus a day. The stretching efforts are definitely out of balance with their daily demands on the body. It is much better to do consistent, shorter stretching sessions throughout the day over just stretching at classes or saving up your stretching to do one long stretch session a couple times a week. Stretching mistake number 4. Stretching too quickly and strongly. There is an important muscle concept called stretch reflex. In very simplistic terms, stretch reflex is a protective response to a sudden pull on a muscle. When a doctor checks your reflexes by tapping with that little hammer just below the knee, the sudden kicking of your leg forward is an example of stretch reflex. In dance, often when you're doing a bouncing motion, what's creating the bounce is the muscle contracting and shortening when it gets to its end length and helps to bring you back up. In stretching, I see dancers triggering the stretch reflex by putting too much effort or pull into their stretch. They think they are getting a better stretch because, frankly, it kind of hurts and it feels like a really strong stretch. But what's actually happening is they're putting such a strong pull on the muscle that the muscle responds by contracting to protect itself from tearing. So you're trying to stretch it and the muscle responds by shortening. This type of stretching effort will give you that deep soreness the next day, which is counterproductive to our stretching efforts because now you have to rehab the muscle from the sudden overtraining. I'm not saying that all soreness is bad. Sometimes it's a sign of using muscles that haven't been used in a while. But I am saying that putting too strong of a pull and stretching too quickly can trigger the stretch reflex and be counterproductive to your flexibility goals. Mistake number 5, not listening to your body. You would think that all dancers would be really good at listening to their body, but that just isn't so. Dancers, like many other athletes, often form a belief that if they can't feel the stretch, if they're not sore the next day, then they must not be working hard enough. We have to stop spreading the myth that dance should be painful or uncomfortable. You know, the no pain, no gain motto. Dancers need to pay attention to the small shifts and changes in how their body feels during stretching as they subtly adjust their position, for example. When a stretch is painful, it's a clear message from the body to stop doing, stretching, pushing, or moving in that way. You need to learn to breathe and pay attention to your stretching efforts so you can adjust your position to a strong or significant stretch but without discomfort. So let's recap here. If you want to improve your stretching efforts and gain flexibility, you need to pay attention to how you're using your body outside of dance class. You want your body to be physically warm. You want to choose maybe 1 or 2 areas to focus on and then consistently stretch those muscles on a daily basis, preferably in a dynamic fashion that will include releasing potential fascial tightness. And you want to be present. You want to listen, breathe, pay attention to how your body is feeling during your stretches so you can maximize your results while minimizing injuries. I hope you've enjoyed this video lesson, and thank you for opting into my email list, and I look forward to sharing more information about the science of dance and how to dance smart and teach smart. I'm Deborah Vogel, signing off from the Body Series.